Good morning, it's Hazel Jarvis. It's a new term. It's the beginning of April and it really feels like spring. Today we are going to do a wonderful project. We're going to paint grape hyacinths with some stylized moths, and we're going to combine both gouache and watercolor. So grab your supplies and let's go. So I start just by painting in 3 light green stems and a leaf. Now I'm going to add just a couple more leaves coming in front and going over the stems. It's easier for me, for this particular stroke, to turn my paper sideways, so that's what I do. And I press down so I get a slightly wider leaf at the bottom. And you basically want to angle your leaves so that they can end in a couple of bulbs. If I find I have a split in the center, then I add another leaf. Just below the mass of leaves, with a fairly dilute burnt sienna, I'm going to start to paint in the bulb. And I leave a little bit of white space between the bottom of the leaf and the bulb. While this burnt sienna is still wet, I'm going to bleed in just a little bit more color on the side to give these bulbs some volume. Then I mix the burnt sienna with a tiny bit of lavender, and I'm going to drag out some roots. So painting with the tip of my brush, and this is a number 2, I just pull out some roots and let the roots begin to dance. You can also start from below the bulb and go into the bulb. So I have a lovely grape hyacinth here just for reference, but I'm not going to refer to it too closely. I just want to get the shape, and I want to get the general movement of small to bigger. So we now have our watercolor grape hyacinths complete, and we're going to add our gouache butterflies. So I mix up my gouache until it's like the consistency of thin cream, and I'm just going to paint in a couple of very simple butterfly shapes. And all this is essentially is a triangle with a fringe at the bottom. And we'll put in another one just down here. If I want a slightly lighter butterfly, then I take some white gouache and I add that white to my blue. So I put a little bit of white on the palette. Then I take a tiny bit of blue and just introduce that into the white. Tiny bit. If you put the white straight into the blue, it just gets lost. And we'll do another shape over here. So you'll see how it's much lighter. Staying within our blue, green, purple palette, we'll have another one, but we'll point it away from the flowers. So here's our 5th one going in. So you've put in your butterflies, and now you have to wait and let everything dry. Coming back after a few minutes, I'm going to add some more green to the leaves with the watercolor. I'm going to strengthen the bulbs, and then I'm going to switch back to the gouache to decorate my butterflies and my moths. So I'm going to add a little bit of dark decorative detail to the butterflies, and then I'm going to finish up with some white. To get a darker color, I take the color that I want to work with, in this case like my ultramarine blue. I put it on my palette, and then I take just a tiny bit of black and add that to the blue. And then I test it on a little bit of scrap paper, and if it looks dark enough, I'm good to go. So for your gouache, instead of just adding more pigment to darken the color, you add a tiny, tiny bit of black. Okay, that looks good. So starting with this pale one over here, we're going to add a sort of a folk art element to it, and we're going to put in a little fringe. Like so. And then we're going to put in some nice circles on it. So working very slowly and carefully. And now we're going to add just a little bit more decoration. So we'll do maybe a line. And we'll put in a little head and a little bit of a body. And then another semicircle. So I'm going to use a little bit of this really dark blue that I've used for decorating my butterflies, and I'm just going to sharpen up some of the bells on my grape hyacinth. So I put the darker colour just in on one side, and then I put the tiny little frill in at the bottom. So while I'm doing the dark, and before I go on to the white, I mix up some very dark brown gouache too, just by adding a little bit of black to my brown. And I'm going to put a tiny bit of this dark also on the side of the bulbs, just to make them pop a little bit more. And once I've used up most of my brown on my bulbs, I go back to my little butterflies, and I'm just going to put the antenna in. So I mark in the head, and then on the very tip of my brush, I just pull the colour out like so. And again, we can do the same thing over here. 1 and 2. I'm going to use a little bit of this brown just to put in some more pattern on my pale blue butterfly. Now we're going to make some lighter colour, so we'll take a little bit of our white and we're going to mix it in with our blue-green. And we'll add some light colour. So we're just layering in the light over the dark. Do that over here too. And we'll put just some markings on the body of this one. And just a little bit more pattern. Those may not show up. We may need to make those a little bit whiter. And just a little bit of pattern on the fringe. And then we go to our... So finally, we're going to finish up just with some dots of pure white. So we'll put a little bit of white on some of our bells. So a little bit of white, and it just really gives the whole painting a bit of a sparkle. And then we'll put a little bit of white on all the butterflies. Doesn't have to be too much, but just a little is beautiful. And I'm going to finish by just darkening in a couple of leaves. So you now have a beautiful little spring-like composition using watercolor and gouache, and hopefully now you've realized the benefits of combining the two and using the gouache to get a really nice sharp tight line and to develop the pattern and the three-dimensionality of something. And I can't wait to see what you do.